One of the biggest mind fucks that I have ever had to do with my ability to severely limit the amount of control that anxiety has over my life. And it all came from completely giving up on trying to do anything about it. And it usually, you kind of reach that point after trying all of these different things to mitigate that anxiety. And for me, it started as just an escape in the form of drugs and alcohol and hedonistic lifestyle decisions, which then went into searching on YouTube for hours on end on how to get rid of anxiety and watching everything from neuroscience to spiritual teachers, yogis, et cetera, et cetera. And all that I found through doing all of it was the same thing. I would hit a point where I felt like things were getting better, but then the anxiety would come back and it would smack me in the face even harder than it had before. And it wasn't up until probably about the last 3 to 6 months that I've really been able to limit the amount that it impacts my life and the way that I go about my day to day. And as I've sat here and thought through, I've realized kind of why that's the case. And it ultimately comes down to like, as humans, we are obsessed with order, right? Because that's what makes us feel safe and comfortable and in control. And what we're always trying to run away from and where anxiety is perpetuated is we lack the understanding that life is chaos. Nature in itself is chaos. And the people who are able to actually thrive in life and get to where they want to go and at least feel good about themselves, they're not trying to eliminate that anxiety or eliminate that chaos. And I'm going to use those two terms interchangeably here. But they're the ones who actually grab it by the throat and learn to use and flow with it, right? So you've probably heard something about flow state. And ultimately, like flow state is the antithesis to anxiety, but not because it's necessarily the opposite. It's because flow uses that anxiety as a means of experience. And so most people think about thriving in life and controlling everything that goes on around you and controlling your external environment and even controlling your feelings about things. But that same chaos or anxiety, it's not the enemy of everything you're trying to do. The only thing that's actually the enemy is your indecision and your lack of directionality towards the things that you say that you want or towards being the person that you say you want to be, because it's hard, because you have to make different decisions than you've ever made before. And so flow state isn't about like control or even focus or even like ease or effortlessness. It's about the strategic dance that you choose to have with that anxiety or with that chaos. So anxiety in this case, or chaos, like it's just a part of the deal. It's a law of the universe. But where I messed up for a long time and where I see a lot of people messing up is we burn our energy fighting it instead of using it to fuel us, because energy is energy. And so we can either choose to fight it or we can use it. People will talk about, oh, you're anxious just because you fear failure. Just don't fear failure. And I actually don't think most of us are scared of failure because we've failed a lot and we know it doesn't hurt us. But what we are terrified of is wasting time on things that don't work. It's not the storm that sinks the ship, but it's the captain's hesitation on making a decision and moving in a direction that sinks the ship. And so when you can start to view this chaos and anxiety not as an enemy to be defeated, but as something to utilize, you're no longer going to be wrestling with quicksand. You know, the harder you fight, it's kind of like a devil snare in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stones, where when you keep struggling, it's just going to kill you. Whereas when Hermione, Ron, and Harry just kind of stopped, allowed themselves to relax, it allowed them through. And so overwhelm in this life or in your life, it's part of the deal. But your job is to be able to move through that with clarity. I always took overwhelm and anxiety as a sign that I was on the wrong path. But after finally being able to not let it have the control that it has, I've realized it's just a sign that you're in the game. And the problem isn't really the overwhelm and the feeling itself. It's all of the open loops that you are in your mind that you're leaving all over the place. And an open loop is any task, decision, or problem that you haven't resolved in your head yet. And so the more of those open loops that you have, the more your brain gets trapped in a hamster wheel of what ifs, which is what makes life feel so chaotic, even when it isn't. And this goes back to that feeling a need of having control over things. So you don't want to eliminate your anxiety. Your whole goal is just to close loops faster. And each loop that you close reduces the mental drag and actually helps you build momentum towards something else, which you will feel good about, which in turn will allow you to close more loops. And then it's just a feedback system. And so now, like, your brain is no longer trying to process too many things at once. And what most people do is they react by immediately trying to plan and trying to organize all this chaos. But what you actually need to do is start to close loops imperfectly, quickly, and with intention. And I'll be able to kind of get to some strategies with that later, but you don't want to plan anymore, especially if you've tried the whole, like, booking out your calendar and having every task on a list. If you're like me, it just stresses you out even more. And so that's where you have to start to consider, like, how your individual brain works. And if that stresses you out more, then don't do it. But by just going in and closing loops and just doing things, regardless of whether it's the right or wrong thing to do, you'll start to realize that flow is just a dance with chaos. And so you need to forget everything that you've heard about flow state being easy or like you're in control of everything, because that's a myth. Flow is about ordering chaos just enough to ride the wave without getting swallowed. And so the difference between those who thrive in chaos and those who get buried by it ultimately come down to clarity and awareness. It's not about controlling that anxiety or controlling that chaos. It's about knowing which part of that wave to ride and when to bail. And so the problem is that most people don't want to embrace the chaos because it makes them feel out of control. But the more you try to control the chaos, the less control you actually have. And so flow and getting through anxiety and being able to actually allow yourself to move forward is about accepting that anxiety and accepting those feelings and that chaos, because it's a part of the process. And then learning how to ride that strategically and knowing when you need to listen to it and maybe when you just need to act and do something so that it goes away. And this is because all decisions that we make, whether they're right or wrong, they're just a form of data capture, right? So we have to stop worshiping this idea of getting every single move perfectly or doing everything right. There is no such thing as a wasted decision if it feeds back into what your bigger goals are. And so what happens when a lot of people try to plan everything out, they're planning everything out, but they're coming up with fake data. They don't know if something's actually going to work or not. And there are things like, regardless of what your favorite business guru or whatever is going to tell you, like, this life is so complex and our experience are all so individual. What works for somebody might not work for you, but what hasn't worked for 1,000 other people might actually work perfectly for you. And so your lack of decisions, the indecision that you have, it doesn't preserve any options for you. It just starves you of the data that you need to continue to move forward. And so the real failure isn't making a wrong decision. It's not making decisions fast enough to gather the data that you need to move forward. And when you start to see decisions as simply data capture, the fear of wasted time becomes irrelevant, because every decision, good or bad, is an opportunity to learn and refine your approach. And so perfectionism is just procrastination in a $3,000 suit. Planning is just procrastination in a $3,000 suit. The goal isn't to avoid mistakes at all. It's to make them fast enough so that you can learn and move forward and ultimately make progress. And so what I want to challenge you to do is make more less effective decisions, because they're a necessary evil. And most people waste time trying to avoid making less effective decisions. They think they need to make the perfect move every time, but it's a fool's errand. And by making less effective decisions, you're able to just figure out what effective actually looks like because you get enough data. Because the thing is, like, making good decisions and knowing what to do and what move to make is all about reference points. So if you're always playing it safe, you don't have any idea where the edges or where your potential actually goes. And so you need to swing in the opposite direction to the opposite end of the spectrum, get maybe a little bit reckless and that's just to find the balance. Because what you'll notice is you've been playing it far too safe and a lot of the things that you've written off that you feel might not work for you, whether it's a business context or a fitness context or diet or relationship or whatever, it might be the exact thing that you need that opens up the door for something else that you didn't even realize was there for you before. And so every decision, no matter how effective or ineffective, is a form of finding your path. It's like using a machete to chop down the Amazon rainforest. But those less effective decisions ultimately help you understand what doesn't work for you so you can double down on what does. And so the key isn't to avoid mistakes, it's about making them, but having intention behind them. So it's being like, hey, if this doesn't work, at least I know what doesn't work. And you might even shock yourself and something might work that you didn't think actually would. And so the playbook now is one, you need to close open loops fast. So you just pick something that you're anxious about or that you're asking what if about. Like, what if I start a YouTube channel and want to do something? What if I want to start this other side project or start this project at work, right? Your goal is just to start and to get some sort of feedback on it. And as soon as you close whatever that starting loop is, your confidence goes up a little bit and you gain a little bit of momentum. And suddenly you'll realize that chaos isn't as overwhelming anymore because the only thing that you need is directionality because our minds will decay into entropy and chaos if we stay stuck. It's like standing water. It just fills up with bacteria over time because it's not moving. But that's why rivers water stays, for the most part, pure because it's always moving. So it's not about making a right decision or wrong decision. It's just about making a decision. And so second, you need to make maybe less than optimal decisions when something isn't maybe ideal. You just need to make them intentionally. So treat your early decisions and the earlier ways that you do things as some form of data capture, not the final answer. So move fast, gather intel, and adjust. A less effective decision made quickly is more valuable than a perfect decision made far too late or after, the trend has gone. And so from there, you're just going to want to focus on the goal. You just keep the direction. You don't worry about outcome because as long as your decisions align with the big goal, it's never wasted because I don't care what anybody says. There is something out there greater than ourselves that makes things happen that we have no idea how the hell they happen, nor can we explain. If you really listen to a lot of successful people's success stories, typically there is a moment in their life where something just happened. It was completely random, but it changed the entire trajectory of their entire life. All right. And that's the only thing, as long as you keep the directionality, things like that just start to happen. It's weird, but it does. I've experienced it firsthand for me. And I'm a firm believer that as long as you're moving forward, something will happen. And as a result, you will no longer suffer with the anxiety. Rather, you'll learn and see oh, this is actually something I can use. And this is a form of energy that I need to put back into something. And so all of this is just about clarity, speed, and intention. And the only way that you fail and the only way that anxiety stays around, it's not from making mistakes. It's hesitating long enough to starve yourself of the data that you need to move forward. All right. So anxiety, it's not bad. Chaos isn't bad. We've been living with it for years. It's just the fact that now we have handicapped ourselves in being able to use it properly because we're also being fed so much information from the outside world. We've never had information access like we do now. So your goal now is you just need to make decisions and apply them to your own life and only worry about that. Don't fight the storm, ride the wave instead. Peace.